Well, to cap off the week, we had one last big meeting from Nintendo with their financial report that they did for their past fiscal year that ended March 31st, 2025. But on top of that, they did field a bunch of questions from investors. And I mean, Nintendo pretty much got grilled about a bunch of stuff that they just said and technically presented with the Switch 2 when it comes down to pricing, supply, their forecast, and even, as one said, lack of innovation for this new generation. So we're going to go over everything that was asked by investors here today. I'm going to try to hopefully whittle it down to a bit of a summary overall. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So this is the investor Q&A. I had it translated over using Google Translate. So we'll get an official one from Nintendo in a week or so, typically, and they'll go in and I'm sure make some edits here or there based on how they want things presented. But this does give us a pretty good idea as to how they answered some of these questions and some of their mindset here. Because as I mentioned, investors were certainly interested in a couple of key points, so much so that at a few times they asked the same question multiple times. So, for example, question 1, 2, and 3 were all about the supply and demand and their forecasted sales. So they ask here initially, could you please elaborate on the background to your forecasted sales volume for the Switch 2 hardware in the current fiscal year? It seems like a fairly conservative figure, but did you set it modestly in light of production capacity limitations, the impact of tariffs in the US, and the possibility of an economic downturn? Now, Nintendo does answer this in the sense of we have a plan. So they go over everything of, we're targeting the sales of 15 million Switch 2 hardware units for the fiscal year. This figure is set at the same level as the sales volume achieved during the 10 months from the launch of the Switch in March 2017 to the end of December of the same year. So they are framing this as the Switch 2 is going to sell as well as the Switch did back in 2017, but it's going to be at a higher price point. So they understand that it will be a hurdle, as they mentioned, to early adoption. But because it's going to be able to play Switch 1 software, there will be continuity for the platform, which means it'll be easier for them to get people to make the move because you're not leaving an entire library or really generation behind. It'll be a way for them to sort of sell people on it a bit more, just getting the better Switch to replace your 8-year-old one at this point. For many people out there, I'm sure it's at least 5 or 6 years old. Even if you got the OLED, it's still years in at this point. Now, they also, of course, mention the idea of just releasing a lot of software and giving people reasons to upgrade, which sounds like, yes, as you figure, exclusives in general for the Switch 2. Now, again, question 2, it seems like the forecast sales volume for the Switch 2 hardware and software this fiscal year are conservative estimates. They say it doesn't take into account user reactions at the Switch 2 trial events or the pre-order status of the My Nintendo stores in each country. Again, they were kind of pressing Nintendo here a bit with some of these, the prediction of 15 million systems selling in 10 months. Like, hold on a minute, that's not enough. I mean, that's kind of how they're viewing it. And he basically is like, hey, what did I just tell question 1? Okay. Anyway, the next one asks, applications for the lottery sale of the Switch 2 began to be accepted at the beginning of April on My Nintendo store, and 2.2 million applications were received in 2 weeks in Japan alone. Much stronger initial response is expected compared to the Nintendo Switch, and I believe it is possible to sell more than 15 million units of the Switch 2 hardware in 1 year. They ask if there's constraints for production. So for the system itself, are you guys kind of bottlenecked somewhere when it comes to just making the systems and shipping them out to different regions? Specifically in Japan, as they mentioned, 2.2 million applications in 2 weeks in Japan. Now, Furukawa says that they are not hampered by any kind of bottleneck, but they are looking to continue to increase production in general for the Switch 2. So they do say, look, we have our sales target set at 15 million, but it doesn't mean we can't sell more than 15 million. All right. This is the level we have set, and maybe it goes up. We've seen them take predictions or these kind of projections before and revise them up. We've seen them revise them down. There is a good chance that they may end up saying, hey, you know what? We think we could do 17 million systems by the end of this fiscal year. So in the first 10 months. At that time, I think investors would be pretty happy to hear that, because analysts have been saying that this is a conservative number. They were saying that as soon as it was thrown out there. And I think at that point, a lot of these investors were like, hold on, this is conservative. Then let's ask about why it's so low, which 15 million systems at the $450 to $500 price point is, I think they're going to be able to sell more, but it is questionable in the sense that, are they hamstrung somewhere in production? So that was actually a good question in general there. Now, question 4 does ask about Nintendo's operating profits. Like, the figures that they presented are lower than were expected. Again, it's just, hey, why is this lower? What's going on here? And Nintendo does answer that, saying that the profit margin for the Switch 2 is lower than the Switch 1, just outright. And they also mention that some of the stuff happening right now, especially when it comes to, they mention here, tariffs and policies that are in place in different regions. And obviously the question has been around the US, and they do ask about that directly here in a bit. But they have decided to kind of work that in as they say a negative impact of approximately tens of billions of yen at the profit level. So yeah, they have been negatively affected, go figure, by some of the tariffs and stuff being thrown around right now. But as they say, they're working in it, and that just means right now operating profit in general, it'll just be lower as they go along. I assume the idea would be, hey, we'll hopefully be able to get this hardware, the production figured out a bit better, and start to shave off some of the costs as we go along, just increase the overall profit margin on this system. So it's not the sense of Nintendo going out there and making stupid money on this system right away. I actually question if in the US that, like, how much they're making on the $450 system specifically. Question 5 asked about Nintendo Switch Online, and it was mostly, how do you continue to keep them engaged? What plans do you have for players to introduce new things? And for the most part, Nintendo ran a bit of a commercial or a quick ad spot here for NSO, where they just went over everything that's in it, and they seem to put over game chat quite a bit. Like, they are really on board with game chat in general as like a game changer. And I know it, okay, so we've had cameras, right? We've had the ability to chat back and forth with friends on the Xbox or on PlayStation or on your PC for quite some time. But Nintendo is kind of lining this up as it being just a big deal. And maybe the idea of the camera putting people into the games and attaching them to characters like we saw with Mario Party is, in their way, more innovative. I question how often that'll be used outside of Nintendo first party, but I guess we'll see. Otherwise, though, they do liken it to the idea of when people were younger, when they were kids, and they would go over to each other's houses to play games. Doesn't really happen as much, but this is a way, I guess, to bring everyone together virtually with a camera that you set up in your living room. Question 6 does come back to the tariffs. Says, I would like to confirm the assumptions regarding U.S. tariffs in your earnings forecast. Additional tariffs will be imposed on products made in China. But am I correct in understanding that you are factoring in the 10% baseline tariff imposed as of April 10th on the assumption that products made outside of China are exported to the U.S.? Also, if further tariff measures are imposed in the future, are you considering passing these on to sales prices? Okay, so this is actually a pretty good question. Shout out to this investor here, because I think a lot of people are curious. How exactly did you handle all the tariff stuff? Where are you with that when it comes to the amounts, the rates that are being thrown around right now? They said their forecast, so the 15 million Switch 2 systems this fiscal year, is based on the assumption of the tariffs in the United States are 10% for Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, and 145% for China. So you've seen the amiibos go up in price. We've talked about that. We've seen the accessories go up in price. Well, those are primarily coming out of China, all right? But as they mention here, hardware that's produced for North America seems to primarily come out of Vietnam. So if you're curious about how tariffs would affect maybe Switch 2 pricing going forward, keep an eye on any news around Vietnam and what tariffs could be imposed there. As he mentions, they have this right now on the assumption of 10%. So any movement there, let's say it goes up to 45%, there could be an issue when it comes to pricing on the Switch 2. And they mention here, okay, So what's the strategy? What's the plan if tariffs do go in this direction of rather than 10%, it's 35 or 45%? They say their basic policy is to recognize tariffs as a cost and incorporate them into the price if they are imposed in any country or region. However, the fiscal year ending March 2026 will be the time when we will launch a new dedicated game console for the first time in about 8 years. So we'll consider how to respond if the assumptions regarding tariffs change, while keeping in mind the need to generate momentum for the platform and the early spread of the hardware. This is a tough position to be in technically if you're Nintendo, because the strategy for a system when it first launches is to have like incredible velocity for sales for the system. You got to get this thing out there quick. You got to build that install base as fast as possible. Raising the price is counterintuitive to that. Even if you do have your costs through tariffs go up from 10% to 45%, was it 35% increase there, right? For your cost of your system coming into the United States. Well, you should technically keep the price the same for the Switch 2 console, but they say they would in fact find a way to kind of pass it along to the price point. If they had to go up to $500 for the Switch 2 as it stands now, just baseline, that's going to be obviously harder to sell and to get to that forecast in what is their biggest market with the US. Japan is a big market. The US in general, just overall in terms of sales and number of consoles they move, it's the biggest one. So it would certainly make things difficult for them, but they're saying it here. If it came down to it, yeah, prices would probably go up. Or they'd have to figure out some kind of bundling process, just something to sort of counter the rising costs with some of these tariffs. To piggyback on that, question 7 does ask about pricing strategy for hardware and software. They point out that Switch 2 hardware and software, they're just more expensive. It's set higher than the Switch 1. So they asked, do you intend to continue the flexibility to adjust the prices of Switch 2 products, or will you make careful decisions based on the sensitivity of customers to prices? So at this point, Nintendo goes into entire explanation as to how they've come to the determination of pricing for their hardware and their software. Now, they say for hardware, it comes down to manufacturing costs, which, yeah, it's going to come down to what's in the system itself, but also impressions of the price from consumers and then exchange rates. So yeah, Nintendo is paying attention to how people react to the system, but the impression isn't necessarily what people are saying online back and forth on social media. The impression is, are people buying this at launch? I mean, even with the 3DS, when they had a massive price cut, they waited to see what the quote-unquote impression was of people at the store. Are they buying this product or not? So sure, technically if the Switch 2 comes out and it does well at first, then it falls off a cliff, Nintendo would probably have to reevaluate that price point. They would have to probably come up with a price cut or something. That's just how it works in this case, as Nintendo needs to move more and more systems to start this new generation up as quickly as possible. Software, though, same factors they say, but alongside of that, increased cost due to capacity, which it could mean the game itself, the scope, sure, because that also follows up with just longer development periods. Could also mean game card sizes, so the running theory and rumor for a little while now has been there's a small cartridge and there's a 64 gigabyte cartridge. I kind of believe that's the case. And Nintendo is putting like all of their games on just the cartridge itself. They're not doing game keys. 64 gigabyte cartridge is just more expensive. Now, we know that Donkey Kong is 70, but it would still be using 64 gigabyte, and then Mario Kart also is now 80, and that's using... So, again, it's still very difficult to tell. We'll find out when the system releases, because I'll cut open a cartridge, we'll take a look and compare and contrast some of these games, especially... Donkey Kong is the one I'm the most curious about, because that would have to be on a 64 gigabyte cartridge, but it's 70. So, it'd be kind of odd if it used the same quote-unquote capacity as Mario Kart, but it's $10 cheaper. Again, there's still a lot of question marks around all of that. Now, question 8 is funny because the investor kind of points out that the Switch 2 not really as innovative as the Switch 1 in the sense of the jump of it. Okay, hey, when you went from the Wii U to the Switch, it was the aha moment. It's like, oh, this is kind of two systems in one. It's the docked console, and then it's also the handheld. and it's just on the fly changing. It really was this like new idea, this new concept that was super different and interesting and innovative. And they ask, hey, I don't feel much innovation from the Switch 2 that would change the generation. They even ask, is this just a one-off, or is the plan going forward to update each function while inheriting the concept of the Nintendo Switch, rather than releasing hardware with a completely new concept? So Nintendo, or Furukawa, does kind of answer what the Switch 2's concept is in their mind, and that is to design the hardware with larger capacity in terms of processing power and performance. I from what I can tell, because look, he does specifically name Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza as not being possible on the Switch 1. So he is just saying, hey, these are games that maybe we had ideas around, but they just weren't possible for the last 8 years. All right. Maybe that's why Mario Kart's taken forever, because they had these ideas. We'll see when it comes out exactly how far they really push this thing. But they're saying it's not possible on the Switch 1. And Mario Kart does have to run at 60 frames, sure. So I get at least that. Maybe the current Switch couldn't do it at 60. Maybe we could have done it at 30, but that's not really something they want to do with Mario Kart. DK, kind of the same thing with all those. That one I can believe a bit more. With all the destruction and seems like it would be taxing that X1 CPU. The A57s in the system probably would struggle to keep up with a lot of the physics and destruction going on there. But it's just funny to see Nintendo say, hey, the innovation is that it's more powerful, but in the same sense, hey, we have a lot of ideas and the innovation will really shine through in the software. Now, I am someone who says I would have rather them just make this system because we never got the Switch Pro. So it would be a shame if they went away from the concept that's worked so well without ever creating and releasing a system that's more capable in general. So I guess in this sense of, is this a one-off? Are you planning to do something different with the hybrid setup? Oh, hey, we'll find out in, 8 years from now? Well, 2033. Stay tuned for that. Question 9 recognizes myself and many of you out there who are watching this right now, the core gamers. In fact, the person says, I think the Nintendo Switch had little appeal to so-called core gamers, but the processing speed of the Switch 2 has improved considerably, and I believe that is hardware that can appeal to core gamers as well. I'd like to know how you plan to capture the demand of core gamers. Well, at that point, Furukawa just says, hey, look, we just develop games for everyone. We want the core gamers. We want the people who don't play games as often. We want everyone. Is the Blue Ocean strategy still in place? Sure. But it kind of makes sense. Mario Kart sells really well because it is a general audience game. It's a game that even if you're big into, maybe you're somebody who's 100%ing all the Souls games, you could still sit down and have fun with Mario Kart. Maybe you're someone who plays games every now and then, you can still have fun with Mario Kart. So that has always kind of been, for the most part, Nintendo's strategy when it comes to their heavily invested first-party games, I'll say, in terms of like money. Putting a lot of money behind it, we want to try to cast the widest net possible. Whereas they will still do some games that are a bit smaller in terms of audience size. Xenoblade, right? That's a great example. Still sells millions of copies. Doesn't sell 68 million copies like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. It's not as widespread. It doesn't appeal to as many people. But that's fine because Nintendo does look to cast a wide net by also having games like Xenoblade, like Bayonetta, like Metroid. And that way you can kind of appeal to everyone with your releases and have a nice variety of titles that get out there. But you know what? I will give credit to investors here. They asked some good questions. A lot of focus on pricing, stock, and strategy around some of the hurdles in place with tariffs for the Switch 2 launch. But again, interesting stuff here. We'll see a more, again, official release from Nintendo with some of the translations, but got a head start here with Google Translate and thought we would sort of go over it here and summarize it for you guys. But let me know what you think about all this down below with some of the questions and some of the grilling they did, the investors, around even innovation from the Switch to the Switch 2. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.